Jose Mourinho has masterminded some superb signings over the years, from a player plus cash swap deal for Samuel Eto'o at Inter Milan to the £30 million acquisition of Luka Modric at Real Madrid. In fact, just last month, I took a look at some of Jose's greatest signings throughout his career in management, and it must be said that the current Tottenham boss has a back catalogue up there with the best of them. That video was part of a wider series in which, roughly once a week, I make a video taking a look at a high-profile manager's 7 best or worst signings of all time. Of course, as I always point out, in the modern game, managers are not always 100% responsible for signing players. You have scouting teams, directors of football, and so on and so forth, but it is still typical for managers to have the final word. As ever, these are the worst signings, not the worst players, signed by Jose Mourinho. A number of them are actually fantastic footballers. So taking into account of the players' impact, all-round performances, and both the long and short-term financial implications of the deal. There'll be some honourable mentions between first and second place, because I'm generous like that, so feel free to like this video and subscribe to the channel if you're feeling equally charitable on this fine January morning. Without further ado then, here are my views on Jose Mourinho's 7 worst signings of all time, or the 7 worst players signed by teams under Jose Mourinho's management if you want to be pedantic. Henrikh Mkhitaryan. A man who is in fine form for Roma at this moment in time and was equally prestigious in the Bundesliga before being signed by Jose Mourinho, the former Manchester United boss was never able to get the best out of Henrikh Mkhitaryan. Indeed, we never saw the best of Mkhitaryan in the Premier League at either Manchester United or Arsenal, which is a shame because he can be a thrilling player to watch at his best. Mkhitaryan was signed by Manchester United during Jose Mourinho's first summer in charge at Old Trafford, arriving from Borussia Dortmund for an undisclosed fee that was widely reported to have been £30 million, although some reports put the figure at £26.3 million. Either way, I don't think it would affect Mkhitaryan's inclusion or positioning in this 7. The 10-time Armenian Footballer of the Year, who became the first Armenian to play in the Premier League upon his Red Devils debut, played by far his best football for the club in the Europa League, scoring in the final as Mourinho's men beat Ajax 2-0 to win the trophy for the first time. Unfortunately, in the league, Mkhitaryan's performances could frequently be described as anonymous at best and turgid at worst. He never seemed to fit in under Mourinho, and before Mourinho himself could be sacked, Mkhitaryan was sold to Arsenal as part of a swap deal involving Alexis Sanchez, a transfer which came just 18 months after his arrival. Wright Phillips. One of the difficulties with these videos, and a lot of historical comparisons, is that inflation, and particularly inflation within the sport of football, as well as in the wider economy, makes transfer fees that were extortionate at the time seem relatively modest by modern standards. Wright Phillips, for example, joined Chelsea for £21 million in the summer of 2005, which doesn't seem particularly outrageous now. However, when you think that Wayne Rooney, one of the most talented teenage footballers of a generation, cost Manchester United £25.6 million in 2004, meanwhile Arjen Robben only set Chelsea back a little over £12 million, also in 2004, it puts things in a little bit more perspective. Hopefully that gives you some idea of the size and significance of the move, but Wright Phillips arrived at Stamford Bridge having been by far Manchester City's best player for the last few years. Wright Phillips had been the Citizens' Young Player of the Year for 4 consecutive seasons before winning the overall Player of the Year award in 2003-04, still aged only 22. Despite his outstanding performances in a thoroughly mediocre Manchester City team, Wright Phillips struggled to stand out alongside more gifted players at Chelsea. He looked a little one-dimensional in a Chelsea shirt and often appeared to be rather lacking in end product. He did manage to win a Premier League title during his 3 seasons at Stamford Bridge before returning to Manchester City for just £8.5 million after Sheikh Mansour arrived at the club. Fabio Coentrão. Another staggeringly expensive Jose Mourinho signing that didn't quite work out, €30 million for a fullback in 2011 is equivalent to about €60 million on a fullback in 2021, if not more. The deal that Jose Mourinho and Real Madrid struck to sign Fabio Coentrão from Benfica in 2011 actually made him the second most expensive fullback of all time, behind only Dani Alves, and the 8th most expensive defender full stop. Not only did Coentrão cost €30 million, the deal also saw Ezequiel Garay head in the opposite direction. Given the size of the deal, expectations on Coentrão were always going to be high. He had only recently turned 23, but had enjoyed a meteoric rise with Rio Ave and Benfica. The reality, unfortunately, is that he failed to live up to those expectations. Played at right back, in holding midfield, and on the left wing, as well as in his favoured position at left back, Coentrao became a bit of a utility man at the Bernabeu, and he could never establish himself as a regular first-team fixture, or at least never at left back. With hindsight, signing Coentrao for such an exorbitant fee when you already had Marcelo at left back was a bit strange, although it was around that time that the Brazilian really started to kick on. Coentrao fell out of favour following Jose Mourinho's departure, and although he played his final game for Real Madrid in 2014, he remained under contract with the club until he returned to Rio Ave on a free transfer in 2018. A wretched piece of business, I think we can safely say, almost a decade on. Mancini. Jose Mourinho had a short but eventful stint in charge of Inter Milan, where he famously won the treble in 2010. One of his worst pieces of business during his time at the San Siro, however, has to be the acquisition of Brazilian wideman Mancini. Signed from Roma for €13 million during Jose Mourinho's first summer in charge, Mancini had spent the last 5 years as one of Serie A's most entertaining and exciting flair players at Roma. Sadly, Mourinho and Inter Milan fans witnessed very little of that flair and invention during Mancini's time in Milan. Mancini only scored twice in 27 appearances for Inter Milan during his debut campaign, showing the odd flick or trick reminiscent of his time at Roma, in a season that was largely coloured by inconsistencies and virtual invisibility. 18 months on from his arrival, Mancini was sent out on loan, remarkably, to Inter Milan's fiercest rivals, AC Milan. If the plan was to derail AC Milan's season since Inter knew Mancini was far past his best, it might have worked. He did nothing for the Rossoneri, and in 2011, he was found guilty of rape and sentenced to 2 years and 8 months in prison, bringing a premature end to his faltering career at the age of 31. Ricardo Quaresma. Despite spending just 2 seasons at Inter Milan, it was at the San Siro that Jose Mourinho conducted some of his best and worst transfer business. The second successive Inter Milan winger in this 7, Ricardo Quaresma, was also signed by Inter during Mourinho's first summer in charge. Quaresma had already had one failed move to a European giant in 2003 when he struggled to make an impact at Barcelona. But having been resurgent for 4 years at Porto, Inter Milan decided that it was time to give the mercurial talent another shot. They would live to rue that decision. Quaresma set the Nerazzurri back €18.6 million in addition to the services of young midfielder Pele, who joined Porto as part of the same deal. Following a slow start, Mourinho called out Quaresma's work rate and discipline in public, but his attempts to motivate the Portuguese international didn't work. Quaresma was voted the worst player in Serie A following his debut campaign, and he joined Mourinho's former club Chelsea on loan the following season. He left the club on a permanent basis in 2010, also when Mourinho departed, in a move to Besiktas, which was worth just €7.3 million. Mourinho very much has a mixed record when it comes to signing his own compatriots, with big hits like Paulo Ferreira and Ricardo Carvalho, but also some real duds like Coentrao and Quaresma. Andriy Shevchenko. I spoke in the introduction about how some managers don't always have full control over transfers at clubs, and Andriy Shevchenko is one player who it is fairly well established was more of a target of Roman Abramovich's than he was a target of Jose Mourinho's. Signed off the back of 7 awe-inspiring seasons with AC Milan, which were themselves preceded by electric form at Dynamo Kiev, Shevchenko had spent the last decade as one of the best centre-forwards in Europe. Such reputation meant the Ukrainian wouldn't come cheap, and indeed he didn't. AC Milan demanded a fee of £30.8 million, or €44 million at the time, which I would say is equivalent to over double that amount now. The transfer made Shevchenko Chelsea's most expensive signing of all time, but more than that, it set a new British record transfer fee. For all his talent, Shevchenko just didn't fit into Mourinho's system at Stamford Bridge. He never really formed a partnership with Didier Drogba, with the Blues typically playing with just one central striker, and at the age of 30, Shevchenko struggled to make a real impact from wide areas. He scored just 9 goals in 48 Premier League games for Chelsea, eventually departing in a return to Dynamo Kiev on a free transfer. A brilliant footballer, but a horrible piece of business from Chelsea's perspective. Honourable mentions. Those who made my shortlist but didn't feature include the likes of Matthias Kezman, Thiago, Asaya Del Horno, Khalid Boularus, Pedro Leon, and Diego Dalot. If you're thinking any of them should have featured, it's probably because of the financial implications of the deal that they didn't. Matthias Kezman, for example, was a really exciting signing by Chelsea, who ended up doing nothing, but the club still sold him for the same amount of money that they paid for him, and as such, he wasn't as bad of a signing as those that featured, at least in my opinion. More controversial mentions could go to Paul Pogba and Nemanja Matic's signing at Manchester United for £40 million that is, but whilst you could debate the merits of whether either player deserves an honourable mention, I don't think either comes close to being worthy of a spot in the 7 itself. Before we wrap up though, there is of course still time for your top spot. Alexis Sanchez. Mentioned at the start of this video whilst talking about Henrik Mkhitaryan, since the two Manchester United players were involved in that swap deal with Arsenal, I personally believe that Alexis Sanchez is the single worst signing that Jose Mourinho has ever made. Not because the Red Devils lost Henrik Mkhitaryan, who had done very little in the league at Old Trafford, and continued in a similar vein at the Emirates, but because of the finances involved in Sanchez's contract and what it said about Manchester United. Upon his arrival, already aged 30, Sanchez was handed a 4.5-year deal worth an annual salary of £14 million before bonuses, in addition to a sizable signing fee, which made him the best paid player in the Premier League. The total cost of Sanchez to Manchester United, despite the fact that he ripped up his contract much earlier than expected in order to sign for Inter Milan, has been estimated to be £66 million. Despite the crazy finances involved in the deal, Manchester United were at least getting one of the best players in the league. Or so they thought. Having been tenacious, creative and prolific at Arsenal, Sanchez was none of those things at Old Trafford. He appeared to have been tamed under Mourinho and totally lacking in spark. His signing had huge financial implications for the club, no doubt upset their dressing room, particularly given Sanchez's performances, and they got virtually nothing from the Chilean in return. Mourinho's worst signing, and one of the worst in the history of the English game, it was that bad. So that's it for today's video, but thank you all as ever for watching. Give us a like if you enjoyed it, let me know your thoughts down below in the comments section, and make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications for HITC Sevens.